Welcome everybody to our virtual seminar for today. We're very pleased to have our speaker today who will be introduced to you in a moment. I'm Andy Miller. I kind of run the seminar for the Department of Geography and Environmental Systems here at UMBC. I know we have guests from UMBC and from a variety of other places. I'm just going to quickly highlight for a moment what's coming up in the next 2 weeks. So today, of course, we have Dr. Kandis Boyd, who will be introduced by our graduate student, Autumn Powell, in just a moment. Next week, Dr. Holly Michael from the University of Delaware will be speaking on drivers and impacts of marsh migration in the coastal critical zone. And the following week, we have Dr. Keith Eshelman from the Appalachian Laboratory, who will be talking about detecting and understanding hydrologic change in developing watersheds, the role of environmental site design. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing screen. I'm going to invite Autumn Powell to introduce our speaker. And I'm going to put Autumn on stage. Autumn, you have the floor.
Okay, thank you. Hello, everybody. Thank you today for coming. Today we have a guest speaker, Dr. Kandis Boyd. I'll be reading her a quick bio real quick. Dr. Kandis Boyd White is a trailblazer and an advocate and renowned expert in the STEM, science, technology, in engineering, arts, and math. She has nearly 30 years of experience leading teaching, advising, and mentoring students and early career enthusiasts in environmental and atmospheric science. She was the first African-American female to receive an undergraduate degree in meteorology from Iowa State University in 1996. And in 2007, she received her doctorate in public administration with a specific concentration in inter-organizational leadership and cultural values. Her most recent federal government experience includes serving as a strategic advisor for the National Science Foundation, Office of Equity and Civil Rights in the Office of the Director, the first Deputy Division Director of the NSF Division of Grants and Agreements, and serving as both the Acting Director and Deputy Director of NOAA Weather Program Office. In June 2022, she was named as the Director of the EPA Chesapeake Bay Program. And then I will have Dr. Kandis Boyd to start us off with her presentation today.
All right, thank you so much. I really appreciate the great introduction today. So everyone, I'm going to ask Dr. Miller, if you could advance my slides, that would be great. We were having a little bit of technical difficulties earlier, and when I shared my screen, you could see my notes slide, but you couldn't see my presentation slide. So
unfortunately, I can't open the file because it doesn't give me permission. Can you put it at just an email attachment and then I can open it? Because it came through Microsoft something or other that wouldn't let me in. It said I was blocked.
Hi all, this is Bo. Candice, would it be helpful if I shared my screen? I have it up and ready to go.
That would be great. Thanks so much.
That's excellent. Yes.
One moment.
All right.
That?
We're good.
I think we're great. Thank you so much, Bo. Okay, so for everyone that's in attendance, I really like interactive presentations. So I see that we have the chat that's available. So can you start by just listing your name, maybe listing your major, and tell me one thing that you know about the Chesapeake Bay program? Because my understanding from Dr. Miller is that we have a really elite group with us today. And I want to make sure that I provide you with the information that you need about the Chesapeake Bay program, but also leave you with some insights about today, tomorrow, and always in terms of everyone's ability to help advance environmental science or something similar to that. So if you can use the chat, please go ahead and do that. I also noticed that a bunch of you said that you are actually looking at this from the big screen in the conference room. So hopefully someone can contribute to the conversation that way. Also, if you look at the bottom, I believe you have that reaction button. I would love for you to use the reaction button as we're going through today's presentation. So that will let me know that you're resonating with what I'm saying, or if you have any questions or you just agree with what you're hearing, all of that will be great as well. Okay, so with that, I'm going to go ahead and get started. We have about an hour And so my goal is to not take up an hour. I want to tell you a little bit about the Chesapeake Bay as well as myself, and then leave some time for questions and answers. So I see in the chat, we have Janet, we have Colin, also have Brock, and it looks like we have a wide array of backgrounds. So I think that's so great that we have a variety of people joining us today. So let's go to the next slide. All right, so our agenda, as you can see, it includes our background. I'll tell you a little bit about the Chesapeake Bay, or what we call Chesapeake Bay 101. I'll tell you a little bit about the organization, the history, so that's the background. But then I'll also tell you what we're doing today in terms of restoration and also protection of our ecosystem, and then talk to you about the future. So that's 2025 and beyond. Okay, next slide. So a little bit about me. I started in this position about 4 months ago, and I'm really amazed not only by the awesome work of the Chesapeake Bay program, but also the Chesapeake Bay program, the watershed, all the work that we do from a scientific point of view, as well as from a policy point of view as well. A nice way of talking about the Chesapeake Bay program is that it's where science meets policy. And so I'm so glad to see some of the majors here on the right-hand side in the chat. We have people that are actually with the Chesapeake Bay program. We have people with environmental backgrounds. We have graduate students. We even have people who have a background in GIS. And believe it or not, the Chesapeake Bay program has people who are specialists, experts, scientists, and just enthusiasts in all of these different backgrounds. So a little bit about me. I've been a career federal employee my entire career. I became a federal employee as a result of a student internship program. So I'm a big advocate of finding pathways for our next generation of students to become members of not only the federal government, but also the Chesapeake Bay program as well. I'm really interested in STEM, which is science, technology, engineering, and math. And for many of you, you know that name has evolved from STEM to STEAM. So now science, technology, engineering, arts, and math, because it's that expression of arts that helps us connect the other 4 disciplines of science, technology, engineering, and math as well. So I've been an advocate in this area for nearly 30 years. So even though we're talking about environmental science, my background is actually agricultural meteorology as well as hydrology. And then my doctorate degree is in public administration. So as I said before, it's that eclectic mix that we're always looking for at the Chesapeake Bay program, because everyone has unique talents that they bring to the table. Also, speaking of talents, you know, it's always important to make sure that we have all the correct voices at the table. So that means that each and every one of us has a voice in the future of the watershed. So that includes DEIJ, which is an acronym that stands for diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice. So learning how to appreciate and express our differences as well as our similarities as we move forward with forging the Chesapeake Bay program is really important. And then, as I mentioned before, even though I am a federal employee, I tell people often that I wear more than one hat when it comes to the Chesapeake Bay program. I do serve as a federal employee with EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, and at the same time, we are one of 9 different partners in the Chesapeake Bay Partnership, which I'll talk about in a minute. So understanding federal service, but also understanding how our policymakers, how our scientists, and how each of our jurisdictions play a role in the Chesapeake Bay program is really important. Let's go to our next slide. All right, so I know I have an eclectic mix of individuals listening to me today. So sometimes it's a little challenging to understand what level everyone is, especially when we talk about the Bay. So this is where I need a little bit of participation, especially in the chat. So I'm going to give you 4 terms, and I want to see what you know about these 4 terms. So first, can someone tell me what an estuary is? E-S-T-U-A-R-Y. What is an estuary? All
We're
right.
not going to let staff members answer that question. Let the students go at it.
Okay, well then we'll keep going. I do see some staff members. So estuary is a term that we use a lot, and sometimes it's intermingled with the word ecosystem. And so an estuary and an ecosystem are similar, yet they're different. So what's an estuary? What's an ecosystem? And then two other terms I want to talk about really quickly is what is a watershed and what is a tributary as well. You'll hear these terms throughout my presentation. So yes, I'm looking in the chat, and an estuary is just that. It's where fresh water meets salt water. And that, in essence, is the Chesapeake Bay. An ecosystem is a living, breathing organism. It's actually a biological community of organisms and their physical environment. So sometimes you'll hear me refer to the Chesapeake Bay as an ecosystem. A watershed, it's just that. It's where water drains into another body of water. So in some cases, it's rivers, lakes, creeks, even streams, and they flow into other bodies of water. So we'll talk about the watershed as well. And then last but not least is tributaries. And I'm looking in the chat, I don't see anyone who's talked about that. A tributary is like a major river or stream that, again, flows into an even larger river or stream. Now, why are these terms important when it comes to the Chesapeake Bay watershed? Well, first of all, the Chesapeake Bay watershed spans 64,000 square miles. And as you can see from this image, it actually encompasses the District of Columbia as well as 6 states. So from as far north as Cooperstown, New York, all the way south to Norfolk, Virginia. And if you took the actual area, which is 64,000 square miles, that's approximately 7 times the area of the state of New Hampshire. So also another thing to include in this discussion is all of the shoreline. So all of the creeks, rivers, streams, and the bay itself. If you add that all up, we have over 11,000 miles of shoreline. So let's put that into perspective. If you were to stretch the shoreline out, it would start on the East Coast. It could extend all the way to the West Coast and back. So just keep in mind how much shoreline that entails. So much of the bay, as people may or may not know, is actually quite shallow. So about a quarter of the bay is less than 6 feet deep. So the average depth of the entire bay is about 21 feet. And the deepest part of the Chesapeake Bay is about 175 feet. We also have over 100,000 creeks, rivers, and streams, if you count all of them within the Chesapeake Bay. So I want you to think about that in terms of an ecosystem, how it's a living, breathing organism, and how it can be modified or changed or morphed. And different areas can change in different ways depending on environmental factors. All right, let's go to the next slide. All right, so the Chesapeake Bay program. What is the vision? As you can see on the screen, we are an environmentally and economically sustainable Chesapeake Bay watershed, and we focus on clean water, abundant life, conservative lands, as well as access to the water, a vibrant cultural heritage, and a diversity of engaged stakeholders. So let's go to the next slide, please. So at the Chesapeake Bay program, we have 3 pillars, or I could say 3 areas where we really base our efforts on, and that's science, that's restoration, and that's also partnership. So when you think about science, we are world renowned for our science, especially how we inform the public about the science. So one thing that's really important is not only to have cutting edge science, but to have individuals who understand how to translate that science so that decision makers can make informed decisions. So in order to do that, you need to have sound data, you need to have modeling, you need to have monitoring, and you need to understand how each of those intersect with each other to help us make informed decisions about the bay. The second one is restoration. So I'll talk about this a little bit more in a future slide, but we've been restoring the bay for approximately 40 years. Now, keep in mind, a lot of the pollutants and a lot of the changes to the bay have happened over the past 400 years. So in 40 years, we've done a lot of work to restore 400 years of changes and, in some cases, pollutants that have happened to the bay. And then the last one is partnership. As I mentioned before, EPA represents the federal aspect of the Chesapeake Bay program. And the Chesapeake Bay program includes academic partners such as UMBC. It also includes our policymakers. We have the Chesapeake Bay Commission. And then, as I mentioned before, 6 states and the District of Columbia all have some portion of activity or responsibility for the Chesapeake Bay as well. So the point is, we need all 3 of these. We need science, we need restoration, and we also need a partnership and understanding how those 3 have to coincide together in order to advance and ultimately restore the bay. So also what I said before about DEIJ. So even though we're thinking about science, restoration, and partnership, interwoven into each of those is DEIJ, because we want a more diverse, a more equitable, and we also want a more inclusive Chesapeake Bay as well as the watershed, as well as the watershed, and we need to take the necessary steps to make sure that that happens. Can we move to the next slide, please? All right, so hopefully you see yourself or some aspect of yourself in this picture, because people are the biggest contributor to the bay. So think about this. We have over 18 million people who live in the Chesapeake Bay and its watershed of 64,000 square miles. So it's important for us to find ways to continually engage with the public, communicate with the public, and find ways that as a group, as a community, as a state, that we are advancing and restoring the bay. So again, 18 million people, that's a lot of people when you think about these are people who are living in this area. There's people who come seasonally to recreate in this area. And then there's people who make their living and they actually work in the bay as well. So not only thinking about people, but again, thinking about these ethnicities, thinking about various cultures and all the beliefs that we have in our diverse watershed is really important. All right, can we go to the next slide, please? All right, so restoration, which I talked about before. Restoration is our ultimate goal. And again, the partnership has been in place for about 40 years. Next year, we will celebrate our 40th anniversary. Now, we have what are called indicators, which are areas in which we might need to focus a little bit more. And as you look at this slide, just this past year, we've had some indicators that have shown progress. We've also had some indicators which show we have some work to do. So take a look at this slide for a second. The blue crab population in the Chesapeake Bay reached a record low, almost a record low over the past 35 years in the past 12 months. In the same 12 months, we had our oyster population reach one of its highest numbers ever in the entire recorded history. And then when you look at our water quality, if you look at the water quality across the entire bay, it's advanced maybe about 30%. But then if you break that down into the rivers and creeks and streams and tributaries that are showing great improvement, there's some areas that are showing a decline. So the overall water quality can be described as mixed. So this is something that we have to think about when we think about the Chesapeake Bay. This is a national treasure. And in order to restore, protect the bay, we need to understand these indicators, understand how to address these indicators, and understand what resources are needed to continue to reduce the number of pollutants to the bay. Next slide, please. All right, so what is impacting the bay? So again, this is where I'd like some audience participation. If you can use that chat, take a look at some of the terms on this screen, okay? Which terms do you think are impacting the bay the most? So of all these items you see, which one do you think is impacting the bay the most? Okay, one person said land, warming waters. Okay, let's keep going. Air and water pollution, great answer. Nitrogen and phosphorus, development. Air and water pollution again, sea level rise, great answer. Flooding, yes, absolutely, absolutely. Stormwater, impervious surfaces, oh, that's a great answer. Stormwater, yes, stormwater as well. So the answer is all of the above, because again, this is a living, breathing ecosystem, and some areas of the bay are experiencing challenges that others are not. We have urban areas. So like you said, impervious surfaces and stormwater might be a high priority in some of our urban areas, but then you go to rural areas and agricultural factors may be an issue. And then you might think of the actual bay itself and some of the aquatic life, and understanding the water quality and the effects of the water quality on that aquatic life is very important as well. And then understanding that the bay is more than just water. It's also land and it's also air, and understanding the intersectionality of those three. So what's the point here? The point is we have a lot of factors impacting the bay, okay? You know, as you can see here, our local rivers and streams have experienced a decline due to the impacts of people, of air, of water pollution as well. And so together we need to address these issues, and together we can make a difference. So, you know, I said this before, but I'll say it again. You know, we have spent 40 years trying to restore nearly 400 years of pollutants to the bay. And so these are just some of the contributors that are impacting the bay as well. So especially at EPA and the Chesapeake Bay program, we're trying to do our part for restoration. And we want to make sure that we're in the field and on the field, to quote one of my colleagues. And we need all of our partners, including you, to help us with this effort. Next slide, please. All right, so I kept mentioning this term, the program, the program, the program. So yes, we're the Chesapeake Bay program, but we support the partnership. So the partnership is on the screen. So I'm going to start at the top of the slide and then move toward the bottom of the slide. So as I mentioned before, we have the District of Columbia and 6 states that all are a part of the Chesapeake Bay partnership. Then you also see to the left of our logo, the Bay Commission, the Chesapeake Bay Commission. That includes some of our policymakers at the state level in Maryland, also Virginia, as well as Pennsylvania. And then you can see on the right-hand side, you see the logo for EPA, and we serve as a partner as well. We also serve 2 hats because we also represent the federal arm of the Chesapeake Bay program. So not only is it EPA, but it's some of the federal partners that you see at the bottom of the screen. So again, I need some help. I want to see how well you can recognize some of these logos. Can you tell me what are some of the federal partners that you see on the screen right now? All right, that's right, DOI, Department of Interior. Yep, NOAA, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. USDA, U.S. Department of Agriculture. Yes, okay, and it said DOI, which includes USGS, absolutely right. EPA, DOC, which is Department of Commerce, that's where NOAA resides. Absolutely, DOD, Department of Defense, yes, we absolutely have them as a partner as well. So the point is that you see how many people, how many organizations, how many entities it takes to have an efficient Chesapeake Bay program partnership. And believe it or not, there's more stakeholders. We have advisory committees, we have academic partners as well, we have nonprofit partners as well, that all make up this important partnership. All right, next slide, please. All right, so I talked about 40 years. I want to just take a moment and just step you through some of the things that have happened over the past 40 years. So trying to restore the bay, as I mentioned before, it's where science meets policy. So how do you restore a large estuary or a large ecosystem? And then how do you continue to address a lot of these factors like climate change and increasing population as well? So this actually started in the 1980s, and there was an actual study about nutrient pollution, and it actually focused on phosphorus and also nitrogen across the watershed. And as a result of that, the very first Chesapeake Bay Agreement was signed, and it included Maryland, it included Virginia, the District of Columbia, as well as EPA and the Chesapeake Bay Commission. Now, over time, as I mentioned, that has expanded to more partners, but the original agreement had just a simple pledge, and that was to have a cooperative approach to trying to restore the bay. And we've kept that as the foundation of our partnership for nearly 40 years. This is a partnership. We focus on consensus. We try to, in all cases, try to come to an agreement on the direction and the way forward for all of the partners in the Bay. Now, if you step through this, it started in 1983, and I know that I'm dealing with a diverse group here. There might be some of you who weren't around in 1983. And so just think about how much work has needed to be done just in terms of the partnership history to get us to where we are today. But I do want to highlight the last agreement was established in 2014. And this was the first time that the signatories from the entire watershed signed the agreement. And they committed to helping to restore the Bay. This included the headwater states, as well as a full partnership of every aspect of the program. All right, let's go to the next slide. All right, so that Chesapeake Bay Watershed Agreement included 10 goals and 31 outcomes. Okay, so that's a lot to keep track of. And as you can see on the screen, these are the 10 Watershed Agreement goals. Now, most of the time, if you Google the Chesapeake Bay program, I'm sure you'll hear a lot about those goals that are related to water. But as you can see on this slide, there are several other aspects of the watershed agreement that include more than just water or water quality, which would be number 3. You can see there's a focus on climate, there's a focus on stewardship, environmental literacy, and again, public access. So I'm really proud that in the slides that I'm about to show you, we are advancing in several areas. And I want to show you some of our achievements in those areas. Next slide, please. All right, again, I told you this is going to be an interactive presentation. So for those of you with a cell phone, you need to pull out your cell phone. On the right-hand side, that's a QR code. And now you have access electronically to the Bay Barometer. Now, what is the Bay Barometer? This is the annual State of the Chesapeake Bay Watershed report, and it's provided by EPA. And this was released just a couple of weeks ago at our Executive Council meeting. But this provides an update on those 10 goals and those 31 outcomes. And you can find out a lot of the things that we are doing to help advance the Bay. So again, if you have your cell phone, now's the time to pull it out, take a picture of that QR code. If for some reason you don't have time to snap it and save it, you can always go to our website, which is chesapeakebay.net. Next slide, please. All right, I also want to highlight this slide as well, because how do you know what the Chesapeake Bay program is doing? How do you know our progress? Well, we have a specific website just for that, and it's called Chesapeake Progress. So the program, as you can see on the slide, we're committed to tracking our progress of our goals as well as our outcomes for the Chesapeake Bay Watershed Agreement. So this is where you can go to get accurate, up-to-date, and accessible information to help us guide and direct the direction of the restoration for the Chesapeake Bay program. Next slide, please. So I want to take just a couple minutes to show you a couple of the things that you could find at chesapeakeprogress.com. Okay, so this one is talking about protected lands. So again, restoration began in the early 1980s, around 1983. And what I really want you to see is that when you compare the pollution reductions from 1985 until now, and then you look at some of the other measures of restoration progress, it is clear that this partnership has made a positive impact on the Chesapeake Bay. So this first one is land and land protection. So you can see that the protection of land is critical in the Chesapeake Bay watershed, and we have the largest land to water ratio of any coastal body in the world. The Chesapeake Bay watershed, and as well as the program itself, we are world renowned in a lot of ways. First, we are the largest estuary in the United States. And then secondly, the partnership that we've had for nearly 40 years has been copied and modeled, not only nationally, but also internationally as well. So now when you look at this slide about, land and land protection, it means that everyone in the watershed is just a few minutes away from a river, a creek, or stream. And because we have that ratio of 14:1. So again, we've protected nearly 1.3 million, and that's million acres since 2010, and nearly 22% of the watershed is protected, and that's close to 30% of our national goal. Next slide, please. All right, another area that I really want to talk about is public access. So that means who can actually access the Chesapeake Bay as well as the Chesapeake watershed. So you can see here, by 2025, our goal is to add 300 new public access sites with a strong emphasis on providing opportunities for boating, for swimming, and for fishing where feasible. So what does this mean? This means that we want more of the public to have more access to the Bay. We want to connect people to the Bay, and we want to make sure that we have an equitable access to the Bay and everyone can enjoy the Bay and all it has to offer. So the point is that we want to make sure that the community has access to the Bay. So in 2021, we had 31 new public access sites added. And I think that needs to be applauded. So if any of you have that little reaction emoji, now's the time to click it, because 31 new access sites in 2021 is something to be celebrated. Thank you so much. Okay. And so guess what? That means that we are 79% on our way of meeting this particular partnership goal. All right, let's go to the next slide. All right, so let's acknowledge the elephant in the room. As I said before, a couple of slides ago, in the same year, you can have indicators showing different results. The crab population is one of the lowest in the past 35 years, but the oyster population is one of the highest in recent history. And so because of that, it's important for us to understand indicators, understand what the challenges are to continue to meet our goals throughout the watershed. So we are behind in some areas, and that means outcomes to plant trees, outcomes to have tree buffers, tidal and non-tidal wetland protection and advancement, and then also water quality, which has been in the news recently. So the point is that we have these challenges, we have these emerging issues, and we also have changing conditions. And we also need to think about climate change and how climate change will impact the Chesapeake Bay and the watershed, not only now, but in the years to come. I saw in the chat that someone said urbanization, development, stormwater, new scientific data. These are all things that are challenges as we continue to move forward. Next slide. All right, so let's talk about some of the challenges. So first, I think the one that most people are aware of is the water quality. And so we have something called a TMDL, that stands for the total maximum daily load. This was developed in 2010 to ensure that all pollution control measures that were needed to fully restore the water quality in the Bay and the tidal rivers are in place by 2025. So there's a number of elements that you can see from this slide. And if you look at the legend on the right-hand side, there's a lot of factors that, impact the TMDL. So watershed implementation plans, or we call them the WIPs, we actually started using these or implementing these to detail how specific jurisdictions were going to work to meet their pollution reduction allocations. So as of 2021, we have what are called BMPs, which are best management practices. And we have those in place across the watershed to reduce pollution. And we're estimated to achieve approximately 49% of our nitrogen reductions, as well as 64% of our phosphorus reductions as well. And these are some of our targets for 2025. Next slide. All right, now we're going to talk about forest buffers. So you can see here, the goal in bold is to restore 900 miles of riparian forecast buffers. Now, a riparian forecast buffer outcome is not necessarily making the progress that we were looking for in terms of our 2025 targets. However, forest buffers and also pollutants, they are important because they help slow runoff. And again, this helps provide shade, it helps provide shelter, it helps our aquatic life as well. And then overall, it helps prevent erosion. So forest buffers and making sure that they are that they are a part of the ecosystem is really important. So another way of saying this is that forest buffers are a lifeline to the Bay, to the watershed, and also to the ecosystem. So the point is we need to plant more forest buffers, And planting more miles is a focus of the Bay program efforts, and this will ultimately help our water quality goals as well as our habitat restoration goals as well. Next slide. All right, wetlands. So as you can see here in bold, our goal is to create or reestablish 85,000 acres of tidal and non-tidal wetlands, as well as to enhance the function of an additional 150,000 acres of degraded wetlands by 2025. So again, we are behind, as you can see on this graphic, we are behind on our wetland goals, and we need to figure out, ways to address this or to accelerate our efforts. So wetlands are critical for supporting healthy waters. They're also important for the diversity of the wildlife that we have, not only in the water itself, but in the watershed as well. So having these wetland goals, they help us manage the effects of climate change as well. And they help us by keeping water where it needs to be, weakening storm surges, and then also trying to protect property and people when we have damaging or extreme weather events. Next slide. All right, so we're going to shift a little bit. So we're going to talk about climate change as well as DEIJ, which, as you can see from the slide, is diversity, equity, inclusion, and also justice. So let's go to the next slide. So this is a quote actually from our Chesapeake Bay Executive Council. So remember how I said before, this is a partnership. And so the partnership is driven by those delegates who make up and comprise the Executive Council. And as a collective body, they provided the following. They said, we believe the full diversity of people who live, work, and recreate in the Chesapeake Bay watershed have a right to benefit from and help guide the future of an environmentally and economically sustainable Chesapeake Bay watershed, as well as having clean water and air, abundant fish and wildlife, conserved lands, and also access to water and vibrant cultural heritage. So this is our statement on DEIJ. And so specifically, the Chesapeake Bay program has taken intentional steps to address diversity, to address environmental justice and issues throughout the watershed. But we really understand that it's not just one person's effort, it is a collective effort across the entire Chesapeake Bay region. So in 2020, the Executive Council did issue a statement in support of DEIJ, and they also developed a DEIJ strategy as well, which includes specific goals and actions on how to advance both DEIJ throughout the entire watershed. Next slide. All right, so now we're going to talk about climate change. Next slide, please. Oh, I'm sorry. No, I'm sorry. You go back one. You were right. I was going too fast. All right, so climate change. So you can see here's three major activities that happened just in since the last signing of the watershed agreement. So you can see in 2014, climate change is one of the greatest challenges that we have during our time, as well as for our future generations. And we're constantly learning about how climate change affects the Chesapeake Bay, affects the watershed, and also affects the entire environment. So you can see here in 2014 that the agreement included a goal to include resiliency of the Bay watershed to withstand adverse impacts from changing environments as well as climate conditions. You can see in 2021 that the Executive Council signed a directive specifically about climate change and how we can address the increasing threats of climate change as well. And then in May of 2022, you can see that the federal agencies collectively committed to actions to help mitigate and also adapt to climate change. So again, you can see how climate change is a big factor and it is continuing to evolve, and it's something that we need to continue to have a focus on. All right, thank you. Next slide. So we talked about the past. We talked about right now. Now I'd like to shift to the future. And what does the future look like in terms of the Chesapeake Bay? All right, next slide. So if you take nothing else from my presentation today, it's that the Chesapeake Bay program is a partnership, and we've thrived for 39 years on our partnership, and the next 39 or 40 years will be contingent on making sure that the partnership remains strong. So as you can see here, these are just a couple of pictures of examples of our partnership. In the upper right-hand corner, that's a picture of a recent trip that I took to Pennsylvania. And those are our partners from USGS. And you can't see it, but we're literally streamside. Like the stream is like not even 20 feet away from us. And we were talking about different efforts in terms of stream restoration. In the upper left-hand corner, we have what are called advisory committees. And the advisory committees inform us in various areas. So we have one advisory committee called STAC, and I think I saw that in the chat. That's the Science, Technology, and Advisory Committee. We have what's called the LGAC, which is the Local Government Advisory Committee. And then we have the CAC, which is the Citizen Advisory Committee. And these are, again, advisory committees that help inform us and keep us abreast of the latest updates that we need to keep a focus on from those three very important perspectives. So the point is that as we continue to move forward for 2025, this is going to be a collective effort. And you can see here in the bottom left-hand corner, those are partners. I believe on the far right is the Blacks of the Chesapeake. The person standing next to me, that's Joel Dunn from the Chesapeake Land Conservancy. And the point is that we need these partnerships in order to continue to work, to operate, and to thrive as well. Next slide. All right, so I think I've kind of talked about this, but partners are more than just the partners that we talk about, those 9 partners in the partnership. And probably each and every one of you can probably find yourself in some aspect of this slide, from local governments to universities and research institutions, to environmental organizations, and to watershed residents. Each and every one of these groups is important to the future of the Chesapeake Bay. So everyone has a role in improving the health of our local communities, our local creeks and streams, and the Bay itself. And so each and every one of us is valuable in our own way. So next slide. So especially to those of you who are maybe a student right now, or you're thinking about, the next steps of your career, the difference between the previous slide and this slide is one word, and that word is you. We need you. We need enthusiasts. We need future individuals who want to think about, work, thrive, live, and operate in the Bay in some way, shape, or form. So even if you're not in the Chesapeake Bay program office per se, there are so many aspects of the Chesapeake Bay, of the watershed, where we need many hands. Many hands make light work. And so we really want you to think about, especially for those of you who are students, what are ways that you can be a part of the Chesapeake Bay? I know that, again, I said at the beginning of this presentation, I became a federal employee because of a student internship program. And I know that we have several opportunities for internships in the year to come, not only with the Chesapeake Bay program, which is a part of the EPA, but there's also other federal opportunities for internships, as well as some of our nonprofits, and as well as some of our jurisdictional partners as well. So if you haven't thought about it, now's the time to think about it, because like I said, that last critical component is trying to create a pipeline of future enthusiasts and experts to come work and then, yes, even live in the Chesapeake Bay. All right, next slide. So I want to go ahead and kind of wrap up because we want to leave a little bit of time for questions and answers. But this slide just shows you a quick snapshot of the over 100 individuals that just work in the Chesapeake Bay program. And again, it is truly a partnership, because not only do we have individuals from EPA, we have grantees who work in our office, we have our academic experts as well. And you can see that this is truly a partnership and an eclectic mix of individuals. So especially if you're thinking about the next steps in your career or what to do in your future, think about the Chesapeake Bay and think about the skills that you can bring to help restore the Bay as well. Next slide. So I am going to wrap up, but I wanted to say again, thank you so much. Again, you see a QR code on this last slide. Take out your phone, click on it. It'll take you to our website, which is chesapeakebay.net. We also have social media channels as well. You can find us on Facebook, on Instagram, as well as on Twitter. And if you want to learn more about what we've done in the past and what we're thinking about for the future, you can always use that hashtag #OneChesapeake to find us in various spaces and places. So with that, I'll turn to my last slide, and I believe it's just to say thank you. This is always an awesome, awesome opportunity to talk about the Bay. And you know, I'll end the way that I started. Many hands make light work. This is a wonderful partnership. It's an awesome, awesome privilege and honor to serve as the director of the Chesapeake Bay. And we're looking for people like you to be a part of the future of the Chesapeake Bay as well. So thank you so much. And I'll open it up to see if there's any questions.
Thank you so much for that presentation. I want to invite people to just, you don't have to post your question in the chat, just indicate that you have one and we'll call on you. There's one posted already from Paul Angermeyer. Paul, do you want to unmute and ask that question out loud?
Sure. Thanks, Candice. Very informative talk, and I like the overview. I just wondered if you could outline quickly one or two of the top environmental justice issues you see for Chesapeake Bay and its watershed, and maybe talk a little bit about the institutional means that are in place to try to resolve those.
Yeah, absolutely. So I wear more than one hat. So now I'm going to put on my EPA hat for a second. And I'm really proud that Administrator Regan has established an actual office to focus on EJ, or environmental justice. And this happened just a few weeks ago. So if you Google it, you can see that we have a very new office that is dedicated toward environmental justice. Now, what's environmental justice? Well, what we're finding is that there are some areas in which people are discriminated based on where they live, or there's certain aspects of the environment or environmental pollution or pollutants that happen in specific areas where you have low income, you have people of a certain background or race, or you have people who just haven't tried to focus on equity across all of the different areas and jurisdictions. So environmental justice is something that we all need to be cognizant of, because it doesn't just affect one community, it affects us all. So hopefully that answers your question.
Okay, thank you. Abu Bakar Brigham has a question. Do you want to answer that out loud? And then I encourage others to either just indicate you have a question or post one.
I can read the chat. It looks like.
Go ahead and read that, because I haven't heard him. I haven't heard that.
All right, no problem. So what I'm reading is, I believe that invasive species are a serious threat, but it doesn't appear that invasive species management is not on the list of watershed agreement goals. They can significantly affect recreational opportunities such as swimming, fishing, and boating. I couldn't agree with you more. So even though we have 10 goals and 31 outcomes, trust me, we have several subcommittees that address different areas of the Bay, including invasive species as well. I see some, I see your hand is up. So did you want
to? Like Kathy.
Yeah.
Is that Kathy?
Yeah, I think that's Kathy from Stack. So I was can I punt to you?
Yes. Oh, Candice, thanks so much for providing this opportunity. And I wondered if I could capitalize on your closing comments regarding the opportunities for all of us to contribute to the Bay program and share. I've heard some amazing statistics about the lack of workforce that's needed, or the workforce that's needed to achieve our goals, and the lack, I mean, we just don't have the bodies to achieve our goals. We need more technical service providers and expertise on the grounds. The one statistic that I remember is that for every job in agriculture, science-based agriculture, I got this backwards. There are, on the spot here, sorry about this.
Okay, it's okay.
But as soon as I say it out loud, it goes backwards. I'm like, it's not right. So there's 6 jobs for every applicant, right? So there's that much unfilled workforce capacity. And so my question is, could you say a bit more about career paths and, thinking about how can we help undergraduate students develop the skills that will enable them to compete successfully and fulfill this work service, not be diverted to other opportunities in science?
Yeah, absolutely. Kathy, I think that's a great question. And I'm going to use myself as an example. I mentioned earlier in this presentation that the reason why I'm sitting here talking to you today is because of a student internship program. So I am a big proponent of finding ways to test things out, serve as an intern, work with some of these organizations and learn a little bit more. I can tell you that there's many people that I work with that aren't even in the Chesapeake Bay program, but when you talk to them and you learn about their background, in some way, shape, or form, a part of their background was that they intersected with the Chesapeake Bay program. So first and foremost, I think that internships are a great opportunity for you to learn more about the Chesapeake Bay program. Secondly, I would say be open to the possibilities. I said earlier in the presentation, my background is meteorology and hydrology. And so if I strictly looked for jobs that only said meteorology or hydrology, I wouldn't be in this position today. So what we're looking for is just what Kathy said. We need skill sets. We need people with a certain level of expertise. And sometimes that transcends some of these traditional categories when it comes to undergraduate and graduate degrees. In the Chesapeake Bay program, I can't speak for others, but we have so many experts with a variety of disciplines. We have people who have IT backgrounds, we have scientists, modelers, we have strategists. We have people who look at long-term goals. We have budget analysts as well. And we have people literally that just work to make sure that the day-to-day operations continue to move and thrive. And so the point is that if you solely think about, this is my job and this is my world and this is my skill set, I think that you might miss some of the wonderful opportunities that are out there. And so as Kathy said, there's a bright future in a lot of these areas of environmental science. You heard the statistic that Kathy provided. The statistic that I often hear is about STEM, which I talked about before: science, technology, engineering, arts, and math. And the statistic that I always tell people is that there are jobs that haven't even been created yet in STEM. And so they're projecting that in 2030, 40% of those jobs that they need haven't even been created yet. So that means, again, having this open mindset, being willing to try something new, trying to hone in on those skills that you're passionate about right now. I think that all will factor into, as Kathy said, creating this new workforce that has the technical capabilities to move the Chesapeake Bay and the watershed forward.
Okay, thanks for that question, Kathy. We have some questions lined up. I'm just going to call on these. A lot of these are from our graduate students. Anisha, do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, thanks, Dr. Boyd, for such a great presentation. I was just curious if the functioning of the program changes each time there is a change in administration at the national or the state level. So does it affect how the program works in terms of receptiveness of its recommendations or in terms of the funding it receives?
That's a great question. So I'm taking off my EPA hat, I'm putting on my Chesapeake Bay program hat. So as I mentioned before, there's a watershed agreement that was signed by all of the jurisdictions. So that was an agreement in terms of how we're going to operate and how we're going to move forward for a 10-year period of time with those goals to be in place by 2025. So that steers the direction of the entire partnership. Now, take off that hat, put on the EPA hat. As a federal employee, you're absolutely right that each administration comes in with their own priorities and their own goals. And in some cases, that can shift or change the priorities of the federal aspects of the program as well. So that's why it's important to have local, state, federal partners, having academic institutions, and again, having our policymakers through the Bay program all working together, because all of us will have some nuances from one time to the other, but it's that Chesapeake Bay watershed agreement which drives our actions.
Thank you.
Thanks. We're going to go on to Riley Wernock. Riley, you want to ask your question? You still there? Some people may have had to leave, so I don't know if Riley's still with us or not. Actually, I don't see her. Let's go on to Janet Llewellyn. Janet, are you there? I do not see her either. I'm going to try to get to people who are still here. And I'll just ask, by the way, if we run a few minutes over, are you able to stick around and answer some questions?
I'm here as long as you need me. I love talking to
Great,
future students and future contributors to the Bay.
Thanks so much. Actually, you know what? I will ask this question for Janet because it's an interesting one. Not that Raleigh's wasn't also interesting. She asks, what are the funds for access to the Bay? This is an area that's greatly impacted by justice. Wants to know, is there a separate funding source for that, for access?
Okay, great overview and update. Thank you for this outreach. What are the funds for additional access to the Bay? This is an area that's greatly impacted by social justice. Well, again, I can't speak for the jurisdictions because, as I mentioned before, funding comes in from the local level, from the state level, and from the federal level. From the federal level, from EPA, we receive an annual budget, and that comes literally from Congress, and it also comes through an organization called OMB, which is the Office of Management and Budget. And so in some cases, they provide direct guidance for how to use some of our funds. And in some cases, we have discretion as well. But again, that depends from year to year, and it depends on our budget allocation. And then, like I said, the other partners may have different rules and regulations for how they allocate funds, specifically in the area of, you said social justice, but in our world, we call it EJ, environmental justice.
Okay, thanks. Emma, I think you're still here. Do you want to ask your question?
Sure. Hi, thank you so much for a beautiful presentation. So I was curious about your mention of the partnership and specifically how different partners share their data and discuss that, as well as any interesting conversations you've seen in ways to overcome disagreement about how to proceed based on the data.
Yeah, that's a good point. So I'm a modeler at heart. I've been a scientist for over 25 years of my federal career, and I can't tell you the importance of data. Not only collecting consistent data, making sure that it's accurate, making sure that it's housed properly, and making sure that it's used for initialization as well as for verification. So data is a huge aspect of the Chesapeake Bay program. So first, I will say that we do provide, at least the Chesapeake Bay, we provide our data to the public, and you can access our website to get that data. I think a big challenge that we have right now is the watershed is so large, 64,000 square miles. So to find the exact same data across the entire watershed for increments as short as days or weeks is sometimes challenging. So some areas of the watershed may have more data than others. And then that is a challenge in and of itself, is that how do you compensate or how do you correct for some areas that maybe do not have as much data as others? So that's something that we actually have a modeling team, and we also have a data ingestion team as well. And those are some of the questions that they deal with on almost a daily basis, is how to make sure that we have accurate data, reliable data, and then data that we can use not only at the beginning of our modeling efforts, but for verification on the back end as well.
Okay, thanks. Alan, do you want to unmute and ask your question?
Yes. Thank you, Dr. Boyd, for being here. I really appreciate your presentation and also your interaction with us. My question has to do with riparian buffers and the forest buffer goals that you mentioned that weren't being met yet, and what the barriers were. But I also see that Erin Hammer had an even more specific and interesting question than mine, and so I wanted to yield to her just for the sake of time. So she's talking more about metrics and goals, benchmarks, but I'd like to defer to her instead of my question.
Yeah, so I'm looking in the chat. I think the quick answer is, I don't want to misquote the goals, but there's a whole website that talks about our goals. And I mentioned that in my presentation, and that's chesapeakeprogress.com. So if you're looking for the goals specifically related to riparian buffers, it says wetlands, it says tracking the TMDL, all of that is available via that website. So I encourage all of you to access that site, because that's the latest and greatest in terms of our progress and our metrics and our milestones as well. So that would be my answer, chesapeakeprogress.com.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. So I see a question from Jamie Barrett. Jamie, you still here?
Yeah, I'm still here. Thank you, Andy, and thank you, Dr. Boyd, for being here and the really interesting presentation. I've touched on various aspects of this through my master's research, but my question is, moving forward as somebody like close to finishing my PhD in human geography, what kind of social research opportunities are available through the program and through the EPA? I don't do environmental justice work. Most of my work centers around agriculture, particularly like, as you mentioned, BMPs. I did nutrient management work. Now I'm doing antimicrobial work. So are there opportunities for, social research beyond environmental justice through this, both hats you wear?
I'm familiar with a term called social science. I think that's similar to what you're saying in terms of social research. And that's really important because it helps us understand why people behave the way that they do, especially in this, through the lens of science. So are there opportunities? Absolutely. I'm thinking like 2 or 3 positions ago, I served as the acting director of the Weather Program Office, and we literally built a social science unit just for what you were talking about, to understand this new intersectionality of research and people and psychology and, what makes people act and react the way that they are. So I think it's a great field to move into. Now, specifically with the Chesapeake Bay, as I mentioned, with all of the partners, I would encourage you to go to chesapeakebay.net and to see where we're working in these areas. Again, there's always job opportunities. I don't want to say how many opportunities each of our partners have, but I would encourage you to reach out to some of our jurisdictions and to some of our nonprofits to find out what opportunities there are in the area of social research.
Okay, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Okay. I see that Anisha had just added a comment about the State of the United States Birds Report saying that wetland bird numbers had increased comparing to other bird groups. That's a positive report. Actually, one of the biggest challenges we have, as you well know, is sea level rise and the pending loss of a lot of our wetlands. I know this is also one of the goals that we are concerned with. I don't know that I have a particular question about that because you can't be an expert on every single topic, but I will point out to the group that we have a seminar on that topic next week. There are places where wetlands need to retreat onto what is now agricultural land or forest land, and those are going to be really big and dramatic changes over the next several decades in the Bay watershed. So,
absolutely. I agree with you. I couldn't agree with you more. I think there was a slide in my presentation that showed, we are making advances in several areas, and yet there's also areas where we have work to do. So thank you so much for providing this statistic. It just shows that, we are optimistic, there's hope, and there's different ways that we can continue to work to help restore the Bay. So thank you for providing that.
Okay, does anybody else have any questions that they would like to ask Dr. Boyd before we close? Dawn.
Hi, Dr. Boyd, I wanted to add to everyone's thanks for your presentation. I really appreciate what you're doing at the helm of this organization, and looking forward to further partnership and hopefully having some of our students come work in this amazing network. I think I wanted to, this might be a question that we need to defer to later, and maybe refer to me to some aspect of the website or a particular resource. But I was really interested in digging in a little bit more in the earlier question about environmental justice. I know with the beginning of the Biden administration, there was an interest in this Justice 40 guideline, where 40% of funds for certain kinds of programs would be dedicated to communities that had a history of greater exposure and exclusion from environmental governance and so on. And I'm curious if you have an impression so far of how Justice 40 if that seems to be being enacted in programs related to the Bay, and what you see as kind of the needs for moving forward with that to make sure that that very lofty goal, which I think came out of was modeled on something in New York State, how that's kind of translating into Bay programs. Thanks so much.
All right, well, I think that's a great question, Dawn. So again, let me put on my EPA hat. And as I mentioned before, there is an office that is focused on environmental justice. Now, you talked about Justice 40. I think it starts with what we're doing right now, just a conversation. I think if I were to query everybody who's still here, a lot of people don't know what Justice 40 is. So I think the first part is just awareness, having the conversations and helping people understand what Justice 40 is. And I would encourage anybody who doesn't know, please Google Justice 40 and EPA, and you'll find out about this wonderful initiative. So yes, I'm biased because I'm an employee of EPA, but I really think there's some great work that can be done in this area in terms of just having a stronger focus on what needs to be done to provide more equity to some of our communities. So it starts with conversations like this. It starts with encouraging everyone to learn more about Justice 40 and how their community can be a part of this effort as well.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Okay, so we are at not quite 1:10. I don't see any more questions on the screen. We will thank Dr. Boyd for an excellent presentation. I will mention to those of you who are here at UMBC, we are hoping to arrange a campus visit for her sometime in the not too distant future, possibly next semester. We're working on that right now. So we're very much looking forward to the opportunity to meet with you, Kandis, in person, for our students in particular to get to meet with you and to learn from you and tell you a little bit about what they're interested in as well. So we really appreciate this opportunity, and I'll let everybody know that we have been recording this, and like all of our other seminars, this will be posted on the YouTube channel of the Center for Social Science Scholarship, and once that comes back and is posted, I will share that interest to those who are interested in watching it. I just see an indication there's actually a link from Colin Simon on behalf of Blue Water Baltimore about environmental justice in Baltimore. So those of you who are interested, before we close out, you might want to click on that link so you can take a look at that when the seminar is.
And Dr. Miller, if I could say one thing, I know there's a wonderful array of different internships and opportunities throughout the Chesapeake Bay watershed. I do want to encourage everyone to Google the word CStream, CSTREAM, because that is one of our internship opportunities for the upcoming year. So for those of you who were excited and interested in today's talk, there's a lot of different internship opportunities available, and specifically CStream is one of those that we support in the Chesapeake Bay program. So hopefully we'll see more of you. And I'm looking forward to visiting the campus when time permits.
Yes, we had Denise Wardrop with us a little earlier, who's director of the Chesapeake Research Consortium, who oversees CStream. And actually, CStream is a good source of potential graduate students for our programs, like the iCare program here. So that's a terrific program, and I've watched it develop. It's been very exciting. So
Awesome.
Thank you very much. We're going to stop recording, and we will share this once the recording is available. So thanks everybody for joining us. Thanks so much, Dr. Boyd, for joining us. And we look forward to interacting with you further in the future.
Thank you, everybody. And thank you.